me introduce Bryan. You probably know him, and he's not wearing my patterned shirt. I did just steal this from the last time you presented with us, Bryan. So nothing too surprising here, but I did keep this other slide in here just for fun as well because, well, if people don't know
Uh,
Bryan, this is a good chance
See,
to.
I was really going to make that joke. I was going to be like, well, there was a lot worse you could go with, Greg,
But I did.
but you did. Fair enough.
But I
Well
did.
played.
Yeah. So maybe we'll have a contest at MMS, right? What's the best? What do you call this when you put somebody's face on the body of something else? I mean, superimpose, but I'm sure there's probably a cool kid's word for it that I don't know. But
You call it an abomination, Greg. It's an
abomination.
abomination against man.
Uh, I call it I call it a chance for a prize when you're doing Brian Dan. So that's what we'll do. uh, but yeah, we've had a lot of fun. One or two of these are real, by the way. Not all of them, but one or two of them are. So I
Yeah.
encourage any memes you'd like to throw in here as well. Let's see. What did Gar say? Let me open up that chat again. What do you ask about the
Oh,
slides? Are your slides showing? I hope so. Are you guys seeing my
yeah,
slides?
we sure
Okay.
are.
Yes.
Don't listen to Garth. He doesn't know how to use
Uh,
computers that well. Garth is my coworker now, by the way, so I feel entitled.
oh, that's good. That's good.
And you're wearing a Leafs jersey, man.
No, even better for those Canadians among us, I'm wearing a Tragically Hip jersey.
Tragically hip jersey.
That is a band, a beloved Canadian band.
Very nice.
Deep cut.
All right. So Garth, hopefully Garth is the only person that can't see these slides, but I'm going to hand it over to Bryan at this time, I believe. Yeah, Mariple's my next slide. So all on you now.
Okay. Figure out how I actually share Teams. Nope, screen. Here we go. Okay. Well, we already did the intro, so I guess we can just skip past that stuff. My name is Bryan. I've been blogging on damngoodadmin.com for a while. I'm a software engineer at Recast Software, working on the right-click tools. I've been there for about 3 years or so. There's my Twitter handle if you want to go yell at me on Twitter. I've been doing system admin work for over 15 years, and when I'm not doing this stuff, I'm usually either brewing beer or smoking meats. If pellet smokers are the way. So as always, every time I do something, I have way too many slides than I have time to do it. I'm looking at my slide count right now. It says 55. Most of those are hidden. But here's the agenda. Here's what we're going to talk about. I want to talk about software update data and what some of that means and what you can do with it. And the reason for that is because I built this, and we'll get to this eventually. Years ago, well, anyone who's used Config Manager and says, okay, I want to start, for software update patching, you get into the reporting and you're like, oh, great, there's a whole bunch of reports. In fact, the first time you look at Config Manager, install a reporting servicing point in the first place, you're like, oh, all these reports. And then you sort of immediately have dissatisfaction because it's kind of good. Like they're some of them are useful, but they're not really telling you all you want. And then you look in the console, and we'll show those too. And then you're like, oh, great, that data's there. And then you're like, that's not right either. And so there's always an outcry for better reporting. And early on, I decided, well, okay, well, I'm going to go do it. That's it. The whole reason I'm here doing this session and know any of this stuff is because I just decided I want to go build this myself and had to go figure out the SQL view. Where is the data? And at that time, when I wrote this was, I think, 2015, 2016, like the docs hadn't even been updated for current branch. Like I was working off of, like the views weren't even fully docked anywhere other than I think there was some old 2007 links I could find. So I'm going to show off this dashboard at the end, but like what I want to talk about is like, what did I have to learn to get to this point to build something like that? At least as far as the data is. And the first thing to always talk about when we talk about software reporting is how do you define compliance, also known as, why we can't have nice things, because everybody always wants better reporting. The problem and I'm talking specifically about when I say that, I mean software updates. We want better reporting and everything, yes, but everyone says, oh, why can't we have better software update reporting? And this is the problem. This is why you can't, because every one of you, if we sat down, there's what 100 plus people on this call. If we went down, we'd probably come up with about 120 definitions of what compliance means for your org, right? And so it's nigh impossible for any one set of reports to satisfy everyone's needs. And I think that sort of led the product team to just like not even try. There's other reasons for it, but it's like no matter how much effort they would put into it, it's never going to satisfy everyone in this room. And why is it? Because again, it's how we define the compliance differs. You might say deployment. Some common things that I see when I talk to people is we might define it by status and age, right? Is it deployed at all, right? Does it have to be deployed for you to be for it to be considered part of compliance for your org? Does it have to be deployed for a particular period of time, right? So for me, like my last org, it was like, well, compliance, we want to know we've deployed it for 14 days, it should be installed, right? Because if you don't do that, the moment you deploy an update or the moment you sync an update, like you're completely now you're zero compliance because you haven't installed something you just synced, right? So what update categories people might define, especially in the days before cumulative updates, you might define, well, there's critical updates and security updates are the only categories we care about. In Config Manager, a lot of the built-in stuff's built in around software update groups. So maybe you're using your software update groups to do your reporting. And then there's just SLAs, right? Like not every machine might have the same SLA. If you have workstations and servers, you're going to treat them differently, and maybe how you define compliance in those situations are different. Or even within that, I'll show you the dashboard. In the dashboard I wrote, I had multiple parts of the business that ran totally different kind of patching regimes, and some of them were so awful I'd hardly, I feel bad using that term. They were barely patching at all. So there's just like nobody can agree to that. And then and that's just talking about the patches. And you might want to break them down further when you talk about the devices, server versus working station. Now that we have Windows 10 builds, you might want to split them down by that. Then you throw maintenance windows in there, right? I'm going to talk about. I have some manually patched. I'll show you how I split those out. And then for a lot of people, like I've yet to find an org that does asset management well, let alone perfectly. And so for a lot of us, you tend not to define every box in the organization as part of compliance because we know there's a whole bunch of boxes that are off doing, on a shelf somewhere. They're never going to be compliant, right? So there's all sorts of awful things that go on that make it. Again, this is all important to think through in your organization and to have conversations about both, on your team and with management to define, well, what do we think compliance is? What is the goal we're trying to go through? So before we get into the data, what I want to say is there's some existing solutions. You don't have to do what I did. I'm not even sure that what I did is justified. I just wanted to do it because I'm broken that way. You don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. And the first question you ask yourself is is this really for you? Is this worth it? I spent, I don't know, a solid 6 to 8 weeks or more building those dashboards, and my employer at the time was paying me to do that. And they were gracious enough to allow me to share them, so I'm excited about that. But it was a serious investment, and writing SQL is hard, but writing really great stuff is really, really hard. Ask Garth, right? It's very easy to Google search and get yourself the data. But then to have it scale to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices, that's a total, that's its own art, dark art, to get stuff to work well. If you want it to look good, you're gonna have to be good at that. And I'm not. You'll see my dashboards; they look like crap. I have no eye design. And you also need to know what you're doing. You have to kind of understand software updates to build a software update dashboard. So that's like those skills. It's a hard combination to find, and I don't pretend to have them. Certainly not the middle one. But time is money. Also, there are some built-in reports, and here's the ones that I personally like. These are useful. You should actually go through and use these. Maybe not in a day-to-day situation, but especially if you're building out your own reports, these are kind of a North Star. Specifically, compliance number 5 there. like that's going to give you your most granular view from Config Manager. And so if you're building something out and it doesn't match that, your data's not matching up to that, then I'm going to say you're doing something wrong, and you need to figure out where your query went awry on you. The other one there under B, management 2, updates required but not deployed. This is a good one to run every so often. I don't know whether it's if you want to do it monthly or quarterly or yearly, whatever. But is there stuff out there that's missing? This is a report. It's not. I don't like how they have it parameterized. You can't just say, "Hey, show me everything." You have to go by individual category, which I don't like. But every once in a while, you should be looking at, "Hey, what updates do my machines say they need, but I'm not deploying for some reason." And some of those might be entirely justified, but it's important to look through that to make sure you're not missing something. Very, very often, it's we're not your ADR or whatever your process is for deploying updates. You're missing something. The other ones are scanning and troubleshooting. Great stuff. I actually rewrote my own sort of scan errors into my dashboard, but absolutely you should go use those. And then lastly, there's this beautiful looking dashboard sitting there in monitoring security software update. Let me go see if I can, there's this beautiful dashboard built into the product that, boy, it would be great if, where did I say it was? No, it's in here somewhere. Monitoring security, software update, security, that's where. I always miss it under there. There's this beautiful dashboard. That's like, oh, this is reasonable and could be useful. Hey, I have some non-compliant devices, and then you just start double clicking, and then every time you click, you get more and more sad, because this is it. This is all you get. I mean, some jazz down here, but there's no, you can't actually get actionable insight from this dashboard. And I've told the team that, and here we are. So I find that like a huge missed opportunity, but there you have it. So there's stuff built in, totally useful looking at and sort of referencing on occasion. There's also some community stuff. So anyone, I would think anyone who's ever built any kind of patching dashboard or report probably owes a debt to Gary Simmons. I've never met him. I don't think he's on Twitter. But if you go looking for these kinds of things, you're going to come up against that link. PatchMyCC was kind enough to actually take those reports and build an installer script for them. So if you want to go grab those, I would steer you there, because importing RDL files is kind of a pain, and they make it much easier. There's this other one that I can't attribute. Like it's just a random website, and I couldn't figure out who it is. But when I was working through this stuff, there were some good ideas that I totally stole with pride from there. The config manager, I guess the web manager people. They also, this is Jordan Benzing. He has his own Power BI dashboard. Great. Then there's mine linked. And then lastly, Microsoft has its own Power BI template. Now, it's not exclusively focused on software updates, but they definitely have some software update dashboard-y kinds of things in there. I've never actually used it myself, but it looks cool. If you want to go, grab it. And again, part of it's just, hey, it's community free stuff. You can go steal it for your own ideas. And the other thing I'll mention is there's also, again, your time is money. There are people this is a viable market. This top line used to be Enhancesoft, Garth Jones, and they have a reporting solution for config manager that goes beyond just software updates. So does CT Global. So does System Center dudes. They have all sorts of updates you can go. Reports you can buy. System Center dudes in particular I like, because you don't have to buy a big large package. If you just want a specific set of reports, you can go do that. They're entirely they're reasonably priced. And lastly, John Markham, I think it is, has Fast Stacks. He has a Power BI dashboard for SCCM and now Intune as well. So if you want a Power BI solution for your reasons, you can do that. Okay, all that talked about. Let's talk about where is the data? If you wanted to build this or you wanted to write your own queries, what do you need to know? So the documentation for SCCM views finally exists for, I shouldn't say finally, they've existed for a while. But like I said, when I first was working on this stuff, it didn't exist and it was super frustrating. So they have documentation and it is frustrating vague. Like they say words that, individually I know what that word means, but when you put it together in the way they do, you can't help but ask yourself, what does that really mean? And that's what I kind of want to try and work through today. And in fact, it's the very first thing. There's some important terminology that you'll find when you read, when you either look at the views themselves, the data they return, or how the docs talk about them. So there's 4 terms: compliance, enforcement, evaluation, and scan. And all of these things, their values, the values for those things are defined in the table of these state names. So I'm going to switch over here to my SQL Server Management Studio. And you can see all of these. I'm going to show you what these values are. So when they talk about compliance, what does compliance mean? It's answering the question, are these updates installed or not, right? And so you see these kinds. So and there's 2, they break this up between the deployments, right? So is the deployment compliant, which is to say the deployment is an object, versus the individual updates. Are they compliant? And I don't fully understand why, but you actually get different values here, right? So deployments are things like it's compliant, not compliant, unknown. But then they have a totally different set for the individual updates. So again, compliance is a pretty straightforward one. Is it installed or not? Enforcement talks about the actual act of the installation effort, right? So we're not really talking so much about is the update installed or not, at least not directly. We're talking about like, well, then we tried to think of the software. What is it? It's the software update enforcement schedule, right? Like they're trying to look at your policy and say, well, what does the policy say is supposed to, what is the intended state here? And so here they're telling you, okay, what's the result of those? What's the result of those enforcement efforts? And so you can see these are slightly more granular, right? This is installing updates, waiting for restart, downloading, right? Far more granular than you're getting above in terms of it's either there or it's not. And same thing for here, very slightly differently named, but again, the difference here is between deployments and updates. And then the other one is evaluation. So evaluation is, that's right, I was saying enforcement before, that the schedule was enforcement, but I think it's the software update evaluation. That's what this is talking about here. And so this is where you're going to say, this is it similar but not the same, right? Like we try to evaluate whether or not the software updates state is what your policy says it should, and sometimes that evaluation process fails. It's not that your updates aren't installed. In fact, if your evaluation fails, you don't know what's installed or what's not installed. You just know you tried to figure it out and you fail. Then lastly, again, this one's self-explanatory, but it's one that people often overlook is the state of the scan, right? And I'll show you that in the dashboard later. But in order to patch, you need to scan, and so this is an important thing to pay attention to. And here's your different states, right? That you get. So that's just briefly some terminology stuff. The way I like to think about to help get my mind around the views and the data that's available is, even though I don't think necessarily the product team would have defined them this way, not that the docs define them this way, but in my head, the way that makes sense is that there's 3 levels. There's a summary level, summary views. There's then views specific to deployments, dealing with a very specific deployment of one or more software updates. And then there's like the nitty-gritty details, right? It's the computer, it's either the computer level or the like individual updates. And then there's like some other hangers on. Is like, okay, if you're going to write reports, these are some views. They're not necessarily directly related to software updates, but you are absolutely going to join to these kinds of tables. And then in most of these, there's also our role-based or RBA component. So often if you look at a view, there's an RBA function with that same view name that you can use. And that's how, if you want to build RBA reports, that's how you would do it. You would simply use those functions instead of the views. And actually, we'll have a slide about that a little bit later. But let's talk about those individual levels. And so the first level is the summary views. So summary views are great for really like efficient, quick queries, right? So the way that these work is that there's this backend process at Config Manager that's entirely black box to you. I believe you can trigger, you can set them off, but you don't really know what's happening. It's a black box that sits in the back and just crunches on this data in SQL to generate this summarized data. So I can tell you very firsthand that if you try and write queries at the most granular level, like per machine, per device, per update, like things get hairy very quickly. You're talking tens of millions of rows. And so if you have a large environment, that just may not happen. Like it just may not scale. And so you're going to want to use these summary data because instead of tens of millions of rows, I'll show you in a minute, like it's 10, right? It's much smaller. And so that's great. The downside is that black box, and then it's always lagging. It's always behind what's reality. And so often you'll look at these summary views and you'll be like, well, the summary says this, but then I go actually double check that machine is like, well, it doesn't match up. And sometimes it's just lag, but sometimes it's like, I don't know, like it's however it's processing that data is inexplicable, and it just may not match reality, and there's just squat you can do about it. But let's talk about the three here that I have used and I think are useful. Update compliance summary. So this is the count of devices for each status, for each update and update group. So every update in every software update group will have this one line, and it's going to tell you very simply like how many devices are compliant or not. And I'm going to show you an example query in a minute. The other one is assignment query. So when I talked about that this is actually kind of borders these two levels, but this is summary for deployments. And then there's also this interesting one that's update summary per collection. So regardless of how you deploy the updates, regardless of what collection you use to deploy the updates, this black box generates a summary for every single collection. So for those of you that really love to create collections, keep in mind that, in addition to collection evaluation, on the back end, Config Manager is trying to figure out what the compliance is for every single collection you use, regardless of your use of that collection. So I create dedicated patching collections, I create dedicated maintenance windows collections, but if you have 30,000 apps and you're creating dedicated app collection, like not only is there app collection eval, there's all this summary data that has to be generated on the back end, which is 99.9% useless to you. But it's absolutely a thing that your SQL server is there and crunching along. So let's talk about the prime example of this is this, right? So, and this is, again, where often we get disappointed. You open the console and you go to your software update group and you click on this thing. And it's like, okay, well, I have 9 devices that are compliant and I have 1 that's not. But then you start digging into it. It's like, well, that doesn't actually match up. So where is this data coming from? Well, it's coming from that view I was just talking about a minute ago, which switch over here. So here's at the top, we're coming from update compliance summary, right? So this is your top level, a summary for every update, for every software update group and every individual software update. And we can run that, and there you go. There you see, there's my workstations software update group, and there's my 9 and my 1 compliant, right? So it happens very, very quickly. Now, of course, it's going to happen quickly. This is a TP lab that I spun up, spent most of the early week spinning up. And I actually hit the maximum. Apparently, you cannot actually add an 11th client to a technical preview site. But I can tell you from experience, I've ran this in orgs with 50,000 plus devices, and this happens quickly because, again, this is all summary data. There's not a lot of power that is needed to run through the select, because they're preloading that for you by doing it on the backend schedule. The query for this will be in the slide deck. If you want it, I will have to find a way to post it, and we'll probably put it on Twitter there. But I'm gonna go to the next level of use here, and this is deployment. And there's a reason part of the reason I'm talking about this level and these levels in general is because it's also not only how I think about it, but it ended up being how I wrote my dashboard, and we'll talk about why when we get there. So if you're looking something to be aware of, that it tends to be when the docs will talk about deployment, but then when you go to look at the views, they're all called assignment. So just in your mind, when you're looking at views and you're in the database and you're looking at them like, hey, assignment, they're really talking about a deployment. And so there's three views that I would like to use. There's v update deployment summary, and this should be beautiful. This should be beautiful. This lists every deployment and gives you this a beautiful summary of like number of devices that are compliant, not compliant, in process, so on and so forth. But in working with it, I realized that all of the data in my environment, when I built this dashboard, that all the data was null, and I thought that odd. So then I asked some other organizations on WinZMin Slack at the time, now Discord, like I sent that query out, and sure enough, everybody who ran that query, it's null. So I actually just sent this off to the team yesterday to see what's up there. I actually shouldn't say that. I talked to a support engineer who's like, yeah, the code that should fill this data hasn't been called since like the 2007 days. So I don't know if this view is legitimately deprecated and dead, or just doesn't work and nobody's complained about it. But it's unfortunate that it doesn't work. I'll tell you that, because it's kind of a pain in the butt to work around. The next one is update assignment status. So this actually grabs a whole bunch of different things and puts it together. Earlier I talked about the terminology, right? So it takes the latest compliant status and enforcement and evaluation status for each device in that deployment and puts it together. It's interesting, but I find it kind of hard to use, but it's good summarized data. And then if you actually want to know about the actual deployment itself, VCI assignments is definitely the one to use. So the pros for me of using the deployment views over, let's say, the summary views, is that they're a little bit closer to reality, right? So there's still summarized data, right? There's still this back-end process, but just from experience, they seem to be a little closer to reality. And so I think of them as like this middle tier between like, well, I'm just looking at the raw data of by machine and by device, and I'm looking at the deployment level. It's still, so the con's still there. If you drill down, it still may not match 100%, but it's better than that top level summary data, just in my experience. So here's where you're going to see this level of data as well. So before I was looking at the software update group, and click on and get that chart. Now we're in, if you were go in your console and you go to the deployments section and you pick that same deployment, you get different data, right? Like what I showed you a minute ago on workstations, we had 9 devices, and here we have 8. Why? I don't know. Can't tell you. Black box. Or if anybody knows, I'd love to hear it. But again, this is one where people go here and they look at this and they see this beautiful little pie chart. You can dig down into this, right? You can, unlike the dashboard, you can click on this and you can get down to figure out what those 7 devices are. But where's that data coming from, and why is it different? Well, why doesn't it match the summary? Well, because it's a different sausage being made in a different way. And so here again, this is a little ugly, but here's where we can get that data, right? It's exactly. I'm just reading the chat. Bryan Mason, exactly. Like it's summarized data. It's awful. I don't know how it's made, but in this case, you got the same console showing what should be the same information, right? I mean, like the software. So I should specify my software update group only has 1 deployment, right? So like that data should be exactly the same. There's no reason for it to be different, and yet it is. Why? Well, because it's being pulled from two different kinds of summarized data. And because of that, it's different, and they're black box, and I can't, nobody who doesn't have access to the code behind those can really tell you why. Again, that query is going to be here if you want to download it. So now we go to like the next level, right? So this is just going down, down, down. Now we're talking about like the nitty gritty stuff, and this is where, for me, the rubber really hits the road. Update info, right? So that's going to list every single software update and the information that config manager knows about it. Auth list info, again, really odd name. That's actually the list of your software update groups, as well as, I want to say your ADRs are listed in there. Don't quote me on that. But every software update group is going to be listed in your v_auth list info, so it's super helpful to find. And then the king of all views for software update is v_update_compliance status. This is the thing. This is every device for every update. And so if you want to go all the way down, that's where you want to go. And then you might also find VCI category info. So every update is part of a category. And in the update info, they're just going to give you some, I think it's a GUID or some random ID that makes no sense to you, and you're going to want to go look up in CI category info. So the good stuff about this is that these are very granular, right? It's accurate. Like this is as close to reality as you're going to get. There are things that can go wrong because all this data comes from the process of receiving and processing state and status messages, and sometimes they get wrong. And in another talk, I could tell you how you would deal with that. But it's as close as you're going to get from a reporting side, and it's really flexible. You can do, you can slice and dice this in any way you want. The problem is, like I said, it's hard to scale, right? Like if you have tens or hundreds of thousands of devices. Again, I've done some test queries in entirely reasonably. If you have 20,000 devices and I've seen places that have several thousand updates, it gets very, 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 very quickly get into millions or tens of millions of records. And if you don't have SQL size big enough like that, it's going to be a problem. Then again, in another discussion, we could talk about using a data warehouse, but outside of the scope. So let's talk about these views because I love them so much. V update info, right? So that's just your basic stuff: title, description, bulletin, article IDs. Is it deployed, expired, or tombstone? Your max execution time, that's where it's stored. So when you change that, that's where it is. And the same table holds both the individual software updates as well as software update groups. And so you can filter those out by the field CI type _ID. 8 means software updates. 9 is software update groups. Again, I was telling you about the info. So this is all your software update groups. That's right. If you look at the created by field, it'll throw auto update rule engine if it's created by an ADR. And the description will equal the ADR. Now, the reason I'm putting this on the screen is because that's relevant to the demo I'm going to do. One of the things about, it just came up on Reddit the other day. Today, in fact, I was talking to somebody about how you would structure your software update groups, and should he create a new software update group every time you run the ADR, or should he not? And one of the things that I wanted to do at some point was I wanted to be able to create a subscription. I wanted to, so you're going to go run your ADR, and then you're going to go, it's going to create a software update group or create a new one, whatever it is. And I wanted to send that out to, I had a report based on that ADR, right? To say, hey, what did we deploy to what devices with what kind of schedule? And so I built a report on that. But then the question is, well, how do I automate it, right? How do I, and in SSRS, and I'm sure Power BI, you can create a subscription, but the subscription needs to run a report, and how does a report figure out which software update group to use, right? I don't want to have to change the name of the software update group. And so what I was able to do was use some of those details I just talked about to be able to create a report that I'll show you later that takes the name of the ADR, and then looks in that auth list info and always finds the latest one, right? So we're looking when was it created? Because then we'll take the, and then we take the top one. I should have. Well, that's right. That's right. It always takes the top one, and then this way I can create a description that I just need to run that. I just need to run that report anytime I run it and give it the name of the static name of my ADR, because I don't change my ADR name. I will always get that report based on the most recent, the recent software update group created that. So if you're creating new software update groups, every time that you create an ADR, this would allow you to do some reporting based on that. Again, there's that query. So now let's talk about some hangers on. These are other views that you're going to really want to use. Or if you're building any kind of report, you're going to end up using V collection, list of collections, V full collection membership. Exactly what it sounds like. It lists every device for every collection it's in. So every collection times every device that's in those collections. And so you can go back and forth between them. Combined device resources. There's just a whole bunch of really good info in there about the detail, endpoint data, scan dates. Is it online? A lot of the kind of stuff you might see in the console itself. Sorry, like if you look at a device and you look at those lines, a lot of that stuff sits in combined device resources. VR system _valid. This should be your sort of source of truth for what your list of systems. Most often you'll see V _R _system. I don't know exactly what it means. Well, actually, I did look it up, I guess. There's a difference between this and valid system, and maybe Garth would be able to actually explain it better. But I believe this ignores tombstoned, or there's sometimes some records of devices that are not valid config manager devices for systems. And so this is a better source of truth than not. I totally butchered that, Garth. I'm sorry. And then the other one that I've used a lot is this big, long mouthful GS system console usage max group. Tells you who's the top console user. And we're not talking about the config manager console here. We're talking about who actually logs into this box the most. In almost all my, I don't know if in almost all of the reports I've written that talk about devices, I've used this to link. Even outside of software update reporting, I've used this to link to a user that you might contact about that device, right? So, and in fact, depending on how you import Active Directory information and what that data is, in my org, I was able to actually parse out the email address, right? So I could actually literally from a device tell you that also had to do with our AD naming structure. I could say Bryan.dam at Bryan.dam at employer.com. Like I could actually tie that to the machine and put it in a report. And so they could literally just then go communicate with that person or send them an email based on the reports I got. So make it not suck. Writing a query is easy, running it is hard. Which it gets to the thing like, it can be a little difficult. It's easy to Google and be like, well, how do I run this kind of select? How do I do this query? How do I join? Like you could do those things. Garth will tell you, and here's a beautiful blog. Not all SQL Server views are supported in Config Manager. And I'll point you to that blog. Very specifically, only views that have the SMS SCHM_users security rights are considered supported. I'll be perfectly honest, I've never let that stop me. But that does mean that they're subject to change. That's really what supported in this case means, which is the product team is not committed to not changing those views. And in doing so, breaking your report. So, but there's certain times when you're going to do that. Do it anyways. How to write efficient and fast queries. And normally, we would tell you. I was talking about role-based. There's these functions, and there's SQL functions. And usually, you would say, well, anytime you're using RBA, you're just adding overhead, horrible overhead. That's going to just slow everything down. But Garth, this is the Garth blog. Sorry, I should have attributed it to him. But Garth actually did some timing on that, and he found some amazing results. That actually sometimes the RBA functions just totally smoke the native views. Makes like no sense, 0.0 cents. But if you are working at scales and you're trying to at scales, at scale, if you're having performance issues, it actually, contrary to everything that makes sense in my mind, you might actually go try one of those RBA functions. This is standard stuff. Hey, only select the fields you need. There's a tendency, because I'm lazy, to just do select star and then figure it out, and be like, well, that worked. No. I mean, when you're writing the query, fine. When you're trying to figure out what you're doing, select star is fine. But then you got to make sure you get down to just the fields you need. Used index fields, it's kind of hard. It's kind of a pain sometimes to know what an index field is or not. You have to go look at the design of the table and you can figure it out. And that's not documented. Like the Fig manager team's not going to tell you what fields are indexed. But if you are joining on a non-index field and you got tens of millions of rows, it's not going to go well for you. And then the last two are like beyond my capabilities. There's a reason that people make entire living just writing SQL queries, because it's, like I said, it's a dark art. But there's some good, if you want to go down that road, there are some absolutely good resources I've linked to here to look at the execution plan. The execution plan is just telling you what SQL Server is going to do it. What SQL Server is going to do to make that query happen. And it might blow your mind, the sort of efficiencies they've tried to build into, the efficiencies or intelligence they put into the engine, to the query engine. And then Server Profiler, another good one to look at. The last thing I'm going to talk about in this before we go hit the actual dashboard itself is, how do you make sure your queries don't lie? And this is important stuff. As you're writing the queries, it can be really hard to know if they're right. and let me tell you, if you get it wrong, you're going to hear about it. And then it really ruins your kind of your credibility, certainly internally, right? Like, whether support or management comes and what's happened to me before is like support doesn't tell me it's a problem. They tell the management, and then they're like, well, your report, I don't really trust your reports, and now you're back to square one. So you got to test it. You got to make sure you're testing it, and you have to test it by at the end doing spot checks, right, on actual devices. Again, compliance 5 specific computer there is absolutely going to be your friend. You want to monitor client health. This is another thing. If your devices aren't healthy, they're going to do a bunch of things they aren't going to do. One is install updates, but you may not even know you're not installing updates. That's the frightening part, right? Like if you're not looking at client health outside of software update reporting, then your reports aren't going to show you that your clients are not healthy, because you're not getting that data. And that's often overlooked. And this next one is related to it. Sherry Kissinger wrote this blog. I mentioned it earlier that all of this data comes to Config Manager through state and status messages, and it's kind of I've watched deep dives that MMS came off of, and I think was the one who did this deep dive into either state or status messaging, and it's brain boiling stuff. And the reality is sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes messages get missed, and what that means, and from a client perspective, it's like TCP and UDP. So, it's like UDP, right? Client sends the message, and as long as it gets, as long as it didn't return absolute failure, it presumes that it's there now and it's never going to send it again. And yet the reality is things can go wrong to your management point. Things get forgotten, skipped, overlooked, whatever the case is. And so what you probably want to do is, the client will never resend it. But there is a method, the client itself, you can call this this WMI method, refresh server compliance state. And what it'll do is it will send everything, it will resend all the, I don't know whether it's state or status messages. I guess I should go look. I want to say it's going to be state. Should be all the state messages. Yeah, compliant state. It says state right in the name. Duh, Bryan. And it's actually, yeah, here you go, Bryan. Thanks, Bryan. It's actually really important, I think, that everyone go run this on some frequency. A totally different talk, and I should put that script up somewhere. But I actually wrote a very small PowerShell script that I deployed that would basically try and run this every month on a semi-random basis, right? You don't need to run this every day on every client. Like that's not necessary. But there needs to be some frequency at which every device kind of trues up, right? Make sure that hey, all the state messages have been sent, knowing that even the second time maybe it'll get missed. So it has to be some kind of frequency there. For me, every month works. A quarter, a yearly might even be fine. But I can actually tell you that if you don't do that and you just plow forward, that over time you're gonna find drift. And what's going to happen is goes back to what I said earlier. And I think that's actually how I came across this, which is, you're going to get these. What I try to do is give these report to management, and they're going to say, hey, you have devices that are not compliant. You guys got to go fix these, and these are a problem. And they're going to go to that device and they'll be like, no, everything's installed, right? Like, there's no problem here. Why are you wasting my time? And then sure enough, you run this thing and it magically updates. So I just can't stress enough. Somehow figure out a way to get that to run every once in a while, but not all of them at the same time. So okay, so I've spent 30-40 minutes talking about the data, and all of this is in service of this dashboard that I wrote. It's available at my blog, damgoodadmin.com. And I want to be super clear again, that middle thing, I am not good at the artistic flair. I am at Recast Software. Thank goodness we finally hired a person dedicated to UI because we all really, really suck at it. And I didn't have anybody for these reports. So these are at best functional. And they do what I needed them to do. So again, these are available on my website. Now I'm going to switch back and forth a little bit between the slides and the actual report. The reason for that is this is the TP. I can only have 10 devices in here. I no longer have access to an environment that has 30, 40, 50,000 devices. But I do have the screenshots that are sanitized from those environments. And so they're slightly more interesting in terms of like, what kind of data do I expect to see here? But you can't click through screenshots, so it's kind of cheap. So we're going to try to do a little bit of both. So here's what I wanted out of my dashboard, right? I wanted a top level view of everything, and I wanted to know the top left, all devices. Like, that's super important to me. That for me, I define compliance as like every update that should be installed on every machine. Like, that's compliance. That's like, there's a tendency to only worry about, well, how did month's last patching go? And that's fine. Like, that's good. You should have reports that tell you how your last month's patching cycle went. Absolutely. But to me, that's nowhere near as important as is every update that's supposed to be installed or not. Because I can tell you that the stuff that takes out companies is somewhat rarely the patch that's just released a couple of days ago. It's always the patch that was released 2 years ago and didn't hit some box for some reason, right? And so if you only focus on how's my monthly patching going, and not looking at is everything that's supposed to be installed, then I think you're kind of doing it wrong on some level. Now, out of the box by default, the same thing when I said like it can't be every update the moment it's released by Microsoft, right? Because otherwise your compliance numbered seesaw, right? Like the moment you sync new updates, well, now every device in your organization that doesn't have that needs that update is instantly non-compliant. And so for me, the compromise I made is like by default there's this 14 days past the deadline. And that's the other thing, right? You're not necessarily going to deploy every update. You should check, like I said earlier, you should check to make sure that you're not missing anything. But the reality is not everybody deploys every single update for reasons. In some cases, it's reasons like, Office has however many channels or whatever the heck they call them now. You don't deploy all of them, you deploy one of them, right? So not all of them matter. And so for me, in my org, we defined, any update that had been deployed for more than 14 days, that should be that's how we would define compliance. And that's how I built this. That's how I built this dashboard around. Now, because this is my lab and I just built it, I have to push that down to 0 days. That's what I'm showing you here up at the top. That I push that down to 0 days just so we have some kind of interesting information to look at. And you can see I've split this down, especially between workstations and servers. Again, that's kind of a no-brainer thing to explain. Those things are often in different patching strategies, and in many cases ran by different groups within your company. And so that's an easy split. I actually go further, and I'll show you that in a minute. But these are three things I wanted to talk about because they're also as important. As important as this top left one is. All devices, every deployed update has been deployed for more than 14 days on every device. Like that's important. But so is these two things, right? Like I want to have an idea of how many devices have installation errors and what is my top error right now. And here I've had to, I actually had to create this error. I had to manufacture it because I only have 10 machines, and I have some pride. If I can't manage 10 machines, then holy crap, I shouldn't even be here. 10 machines are pretty easy to keep at 100%. But you're going to have installation errors. It's going to be a thing. And the way I talk about when I talk about automation is, patch compliance and getting to that 100%, right? Which is 100% is impossible. It's impossible outside of insane amounts of human resources to deal with the long tail. But you're going to have a tail. In fact, let me switch over here to this. If I go here, here's the screenshot of the org where I built this, right? And you can see here's my top installation errors, right? So this operation returned because timeout. I can tell you what that is. That is the fact that years ago you had a 10-minute max runtime on most updates, including at some point cumulative updates, right? This was one that I saw all the time. I also had a whole bunch of VMs, especially in our lab. We had there was somebody who at some point thought, I believe, what was it, 20 or 30 gigabytes would be fine for an OS. So no word of a lie, like hundreds. This actually underreports it. This is production. This came out of production. But like our lab, like I would say 20%. We had hundreds of devices where I would always get this. And in fact, you can see it on the scan list too. Not enough storage there's not enough disk to run a scan. That's how bad it was. Access denied. It's like these are the kinds of things you're going to get. But what's important is why this was important to me is that you can see the numbers here, right? Like these, in terms of going after compliance and fixing stuff, like these top two do what? 150 something odd, 232 devices, if I'm doing my math right. No, 252. Right. If I can take care of these two things, these are clearly my top two issues. These stuff is important, but if I have 1,000 devices, that's not horrible. I should get there, but that's the long tail. Let me show you scan errors here as well. This is the other thing, right? That if you're not scanning, if you're failing to scan, and let's be honest, you're failing to scan because WSUS is a big pile of crap. or you don't have enough storage. Okay, fair enough. I'll give them that one. That's on me. But if you're not scanning, you're not getting updates. Like you're not installing updates. So as important as deploying the update is and making sure that it's installing without errors, none of those things happen, right? If you're not scanning correctly, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't even know that you're missing patches because, again, config manager is not getting the data that there's patches that need to install on this box. And this last one, boy, this is one where I should just block it out. This used to work, and actually this was the impetus for wanting to do this when Greg asked me, because I want to go fix this. But the idea was with the cumulative update model. So George Simmons, it's like, hey, CU's made this stuff easier, and he's totally right. Like as much as when CU's happened, I know people moaned and complained up the wazoo about how awful they were, but this is a silver lining, is that they make patching simple, and they also make patching reporting more simple. It's not, I'm not worried about 10,000 updates that might need to install on this machine. There are other things I want to stress. There are other updates than just CUs, and this is a thing I've tried to hammer to the product team, and they specifically Intune product team, and they don't seem to grasp. There are updates outside of the OS and .NET cumulative updates, but let's face it, those are the ones you got to get right. Like, you got to get those out. And so what this report here tries to do, or this part of it tries to do, is normalize the OS data and the update data. And what it's going to try and do is say how many devices in your org don't have the most recent cumulative update for that particular OS. Unfortunately, Windows 10 doesn't work right now, and that's what I got to go fix. It's a whole bunch of really ugly string hacking, but it is useful, right? Like this is a useful metric to know, are my devices, for all the other stuff happening, am I at least getting the latest CU out the door? So I'm going to switch back now to the actual live thing, because again, not much stuff is here as interesting as it was here, but we can drill down into each of these. So we were just showing the top 10, but here we're going to show you all of these, and we can show you the individual devices that are in there, the ones that have that particular error, and you can drill down further, but I'm going to drill down into individual machines at a later point. So again, this is one device. Most orgs are going to have lots and lots of things listed there. If we go back, the certificate chain process. So I specifically had to make that break. I think I saw a comment in the chat. I very specifically had to take a machine that was in the domain and take it out of it, so that it no longer trusted WSUS and get it to scan. But here's an example. And I did a bunch of work. I should really blog this, or maybe find a blog and put a link. But there are ways to get error descriptions into your reports. If I have time, and I probably won't, I can try and show you that function. But there is a way to take these error codes and put some meaning to them. As you can see, as you might have seen in my screenshot, it's not perfect. There's some stuff that's not listed there. But hey, it's an effort was made. So we're going to dig down a little further into the individual devices. But before I do that, what you can do here is, so right now this is showing all of this data below these donuts are for all devices, right? So we're showing software update all devices. When we click on workstations, we'll refresh this report, and now the data down here is just for workstations. If you're in the server group and you really care about servers, we can click down and click on servers, and now we're just looking at the data for servers. And if you want to click back on all devices, we can go back in all devices. Now, this is, again, for a top level dashboard, I think this is like a reasonable split, all devices, all workstations, all servers. But the org where I was, that is definitely not the end of the division of labor. And so if you actually click on any of this data, we're going to drill down into a larger, the top three are all the same, but now you can slice and dice into as you want. So in this report, you could edit this report, and if I have time, I can show you how to do that. You would edit this report and just give me the collection name you want to use. that's what's going to show these last 6 here. So at my last org, we were a large retailer. And so, yeah, we had all workstations, but there were workstations that were on the campus or, in the office. But then we had the PCs were sitting in actual stores, whether those were, some of those were kiosks, some of those, were kind of like the price checkers. But others were team, things that employees would use to do inventory and Lord knows what. And then we also had the point of sales team. And in that environment, those 3 things were different groups of people, right? Like they were different departments. There was a group dedicated to campus PCs, store PCs, and point of sales. On the server side, we didn't have that quite so much. What we did have is we had a whole bunch of servers that were in what I called the patching penalty box. So specifically our Exchange and SharePoint servers, they were manually patched. And that's the same way as saying they were basically not patched. And we knew that, right? Like that's a risk our organization decided to take, that we're going to just have crappy patched, boxes that aren't patched well. But I don't want that in my data, right? Like I'm doing my job as a patch admin. I'm patching what you guys let me patch. And so I was able to, here I'm breaking that down, right? So I created a collection that had everything that would let me patch, right? Here's all my servers that have a valid maintenance window. And you can, again, these are just collections. You define them how you want. But this is how I broke it down. So like this, for me, this top one, this is the number I really cared about. If this was good, that means that I'm doing well. The manually patched devices, that was there for when security came to me and complained about, the Exchange or SQL. And I was like, well, they're in the manual patch collection. Like you need to go talk to the Exchange team that refuses to go click buttons. And so this was important for me to be able to slice and dice this. But okay, great. But now we want to go further, right? So now we're going to go down into this is non-compliant device. That's where you're going to care. You're really going to care about the non-compliant devices, obviously, but it doesn't do a great demo. So let me show you what this looks like when we have multiple. So what this is going to show you is every device, in this case, all the compliant devices in that group. And what it's going to do is show you every software update group that's been deployed. Now, in my environment, again, it's just TP. I only have one software update group, but in a real environment, you would see multiple here. Let's see if I actually let's see if I have a screenshot of that. Right. So I've wiped out the names here, but here you can see for this device here, we have these 2. Oh gosh, nope, I've done wrong. We have these 2 software update groups, and so when I was talking earlier about the level, what level I'm doing this reporting at, I'm looking at the deployments, right? So here I'm looking at, is the deployment compliant? I'm not looking at every individual update because that just doesn't scale. I can't run this query. I can't run this report in a timely manner if I'm going down to that crazy granular level. It just doesn't scale. And so that's why what I'm going to do is show you the deployments and whether they're compliant or not. I'm going to switch back quickly here to that uncompliant or non-compliant machine. Right there. Because I'm going to drill down to the sort of last level. So now if I drill down into this individual machine, now I'm going to get, this is one machine and the updates that are, in this case, not compliant. And I'm giving a bunch of data here, right? So when I was talking about user, I don't have this set up. I should have set this up. I don't have this set up in my environment, but I'm going to go using that user table I was talking about earlier to go grab, what's the username and what's their email address. Hey, when did the machine last talk to config manager? Give me anything. What was the scan? What's the scan stuff? So am I waiting for a reboot or a maintenance window? These are all, we found this specific report when trying to troubleshoot issues on an individual device, super, super helpful. And it is, in my opinion, better than the one that's built in. So there was a question about how you might edit these, and since I have, I think, I'm going to say about 5 to 10 minutes left. If anybody has questions, please just come off mute. I should have said that right at the beginning. But if anyone has questions, just come off mute, yell at me while I do this. I think I need to edit this thing. So if I go into, what you're going to do is you're going to download. So on the website, I kind of walk you through like, hey, here's how you would download this thing. And you would import them. And then we need to go, I've imported them here. And what you would do on that one is this. I would edit this. You'll need to install Microsoft Report Builder. I don't think that SSRS installs it by default anymore. But you're going to come in here and you're going to edit this report. When it loads. There we go. And what you're going to look for is these parameters. And so there's specifically, come on, let me do this. You can come in here and you can edit the collection name for these. And you can set the default value. So here, this is the name of my of the collection, right? So I don't even need the collection ID. Just give me the name of the collection, and then you might edit. I think I'm going to fix this, but right now you would double click in there and you would give it whatever title you want for that chart. So one other report I'm going to show, and then I will shut up. There's a couple other reports in here outside of the dashboard, the ADR chart I was talking about. So again, this one, my main design goal was, can I create a subscription? I want to create a subscription that will allow you to always send the latest software update group. So here, here's my list of ADRs, which we get from that same off list table. And I can select that and view it. And this is going to give me this report of what updates are in that. And this was important for my go back to the SQL and SharePoint team. Like they wanted to know, like we want you to communicate with me every month what you plan on pushing to these boxes. And so this was my method of doing it. Okay, with that, do we have any questions? And I can just run through the chat. People want to come off mute, you can do that. Yeah, absolutely, Donna. Go ahead and heckle me. Brian asked, latest dashboard from 2018. Yeah, I really haven't updated in that long. The only thing that really doesn't stand the test of time is that latest CU, and I need to go fix that. Yeah, totally need to go fix that.
One question I caught in there, Brian, people were asking about how easy it is to take what you have and put it in their environment.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It isn't. It's slightly tedious. It's not hard. It's just slightly tedious. And I actually have instructions. Let me go. Let me click on the link. I'll just click on the link. I actually have instructions on what you need to do in the blog post where I have it. So let me. Yeah. No, we don't need to verify. Oh, PowerPoint, trying to make sure I don't click random links to my own blog. That's so nice. So, nope. This one, where I have. So the steps high level are you're going to go to your report server, create a folder where you want it, and then the only thing you need to do is change the data source. And I'll walk you through this in a minute, just in an example report. And then there's one place where there's one place where you need to put in your site code in the thing. So actually, you know what? Let me just do this. Let me. If there's other, Greg, can you do this? Can you see if there's any questions and just ask them, or if anybody wants to come off, you go for it while I do this.
Yeah, I'll moderate
So-
and see if there's any more questions come in. You be productive there.
So here's the download. So I downloaded this the other day, and so these instructions are true, but I'm going to show you basically what the shortcut is, which is to use the thing you should always use, which is Notepad++. It is both the solution and cause of all our problems. But what you want to do is go in here, because these steps will have, like, this is how you make it untedious, which is you open Notepad++, you go in here and you do search and replace. Control H. I can't do anything in a menu. I just need this. You can do find in files, and you're going to do this config manager *** with whatever the name of your site is. In my case, TP1. So I go ahead and say, wait a minute, let's make sure I do this right. Blah 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 blah. Yep, replacing files. Sweet. Now I'm going to take those reports and copy them over to my server.
And the way that I'd done it in the past is the tedious way. You know, you log into the website and you upload it and you have to click and change it. I was ready to pull my hair out. Wait a minute, I'm already bald. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, the uploading part is still the crappy part. So if you go into, where's my console? If you go into your console, stop, Brian. Stop just clicking random things. Which was it? Is it report server or report manager? Probably report manager because I just clicked on the one. Oh, no way I'm going to be able to type this. Yep. Yep, wrong one. Knew it would be. Which means I get to do this again. So yeah, Greg, if there are questions, just shout them at me and I'll live.
Yeah, I think we're good. Unless anybody has anything else, you can finish up here with what you got.
Okay. Yeah. So what you would do here is, so you would come in here and you would create a new folder. At least this is what I would do. I'd create a new dashboard. And then you're just going to have to go, unfortunately, what you have to go do is kind of upload them one at a time. So now you come in here to the desktop and you're going to import these one at a time.
Yeah, this is the tedious part.
Yeah. Yeah. But because we did that part before, this should just work.
Yeah, you don't have to go in there and change it. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, what you might want to do, like when you import the, a couple of things you might want to change there. If you let me upload the actual dashboard there for a second. Yeah, of course it should work. What could possibly go wrong? Hey, it did work. It ran. Can we edit? Yeah, we can edit this one. Oh, dang you. Okay. Back. Can I edit from here? Tell me I can edit from here. There's a couple things even in this dashboard you might want to go in and change because the same way I want to see if I'm hard coding. Some collections there, and you might want to update those. Oh no, I don't think I am. I mentioned that 14 days. That for me, like 14 days was our thing. If it's not for you, right? If you want, if you're like, well, it's 15 days, you would come in. You could change it, like you could run the report, but what I would do is you come in here and change this default to 15. That's the other thing I would edit. The only other thing is the thing I already showed you, which is when you drill down that next level, you know, if you don't need that many, you can delete. You know, you could delete those. Let me show you. You could delete those charts if you want to. You could really just, if you want to copy, like if you want more, you can just kind of copy and paste some stuff. Shouldn't be too hard. But yeah.
As long as you have all the uploaded, all the RDL files, and you're clicking to drill down, it should find all the other like different reports that you have in that folder.
Yeah, I absolutely made sure that they're relative links, just like a relative path file. So like, so what I will say is like, don't mess. I mean, it's a very simple folder structure. The one to get right is this troubleshooting, right? That's just make sure that these troubleshooting reports are down in here. Not that I'm going to demo them, but when we drilled down to like installation errors, I think it was showing it by errors, but you can do there's also a report here by the reverse. So it shows like it lists every device and which errors they have. So if you have for some sadomasochistic reason, you want to know what is the worst device you have, what device has the most failures in your org, this report will show you.
Excellent.
Oh, and then the other one that can be useful is by update as well, right? So and that's not really tied into. I don't know if it's tied into the dashboard, but if you want to figure out, well, which update has the most errors, you can do that as well. I find that it can't, like, in certain cases, it's useful when it's not like an environmental problem, right? When it's not like disk full is not a problem with the update, but as we all know, there's some updates that do stupid things. And so this would be a good way to figure out which machines are doing that stupid thing. Okay, with that, I'll hit it off. I think I went only a few minutes over time, which is amazing for me, especially since I didn't even, like, at no point did I time any of this. But I'll hang around in the chat for a little bit. I do have to go in like a little bit. My son has a play that I need to go see. So, but I will hang around in the chat if anybody, and I'll scroll up and see if there's anything else I can answer. But feel free to reach out on Twitter, or I'm in the Wins and Min Discord all the time. I'm somewhat silent mode, but I'm always there. You can ping me. Oh Lordy, well done, Gary. Well done. Thanks, everyone.
That's a good one. Got to grab.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Really appreciate it.